Appeals. We are live, we are recording on YouTube, and we are streaming on the channel. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good morning and welcome to the Village of East Hampton Zoning Board of Appeals meeting for Friday, June 9th. I'd like to thank LTV Studios for hosting us once more. We have the minutes from May 12th, 2003. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We have 5 determinations today, and the entire files are available at Village Hall if you'd like to review them. In the application of Christopher Yeager and Phoebe Seimer, 9 Sag Harbor Road, Suffolk County Tax Map Number 301-2-3-10, to convert a garage to a pool house and to legalize a patio, is approved with conditions. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Pam, can you poll the board, please?
Mr. McGurk?
Yes.
Mr. McMullen?
Yes.
Mr. O'Connell?
Yes.
Mr. Rose?
Yes.
Ms. Fitzsimons?
Yes.
Second determination in the application of Appoquog 72 LLC, 72 Appoquog Road, Suffolk County Tax Map Number 301-12-6-9, to make alterations to a pre-existing non-conforming house that exceeds the maximum height limits and number of stories is approved. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Second.
Pam?
Mr. McGurk?
Yes.
Mr. McMullen?
Yes.
Mr. O'Connell?
Yes.
Ms. Fitzsimons?
Yes.
In the application of David and Jennifer Hammond, 11 Pondview Lane, Suffolk County Tax Map Number 301-9-1-9.4, to allow coverage to exceed the maximum allowable limit, is approved. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Pam?
Mr. McGurk?
Yes.
Mr. O'Connell?
No.
Mr. Rose?
Yes.
Mr. Barris?
Yes.
Ms. Fitzsimons?
Yes.
In the application of CG 85 LLC, 104 Georgia Close Road, Suffolk County Tax Map Number 301-7-4-14.2, to make alterations to the existing residence, construct additions, reconstruct an existing tennis court, construct a swimming pool, pool house, sanitary system, and drainage structures, and to remove Phragmites is approved with conditions. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Pam?
Mr. McGurk?
Yes.
Mr. O'Connell?
Yes.
Mr. Rose?
Yes.
Mr. Barris?
Yes.
Ms. Fitzsimons?
Yes.
All right, Jeanette, why don't you read that one, Colette? Which one's the last one?
In the application of Guild Hall of East Hampton, Inc., 158 Main Street, Suffolk County Tax Map Number 301-8-5-3, to make alterations to an existing theater use and construct 2 additions, is approved. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Pam, can we poll the board?
Mr. O'Connell?
Yes.
Mr. Rose?
Yes.
Mr. Barris?
Yep.
Ms. Fitzsimons?
Yes.
Okay, we do have a withdrawn application on 50 East Hollow LLC, 50 East Hollow Road. We do have an adjournment from the Maidstone Club at 50 Old Beach Lane to July 14th. I think we're waiting for a septic. Okay, plan. And then we're on for the hearings for today. Pam, can you please read the notice?
Application of Nichols Ocean LLC, Suffolk County Tax Map Number 301-1311-12 for area variances from Chapter 278 zoning, Chapter 101 coastal erosion hazard areas, and Chapter 124 preservation of dunes to legalize the enlargement of a deck. A variance and coastal erosion hazard area permit is requested pursuant to Sections 1017, 1019B, 10119 to legalize the enlargement of a deck within the coastal erosion hazard area. A 2-foot variance from Section 278-385B is required to legalize the enlargement of a deck located 8 feet from a side yard lot line where the required side yard setback is 10 feet. Variances are requested from Section 124.5 and to legalize the expansion of a deck located predominantly seaward of the 100-foot setback from the 15-foot contour and entirely seaward of the 150-foot setback from the edge of beach where disturbance and structures are prohibited within 100 feet of the 15-foot contour or within 150 feet of the edge of beach. The subject property is 10,095 square feet in size and is located at the terminus of Nichols Lane with frontage on the Atlantic Ocean beach. The property is located in Residence District District R160, and this project is classified as a Type 2 action in accordance with SECRA.
Thank you, Pam. Good morning, Ms. Ackerman.
Good morning. Good morning, members of the board. It was nice of you to have such a good audience for me today. So a little historical footnote. From 1971 to 1987, Bob Dylan lived in this house. He wrote the very famous album Desire. During his period of occupancy, I had the good fortune of meeting his father and touring this house. I never thought that today, in 2023, I'd be back here asking for relief. On Dylan's sale in 1987, the Russell family bought this property, and they owned it from 87 to 2023. My client, who has a home under restoration at 128 Lily Pond Lane, bought this property for access to the ocean. This is a unique piece of property because it has no habitable space in terms of electric, there's no water. It's simply a deck and access to the ocean. We've submitted a restoration plan from Inner Science that you have before us. That plan was subsequently amended per Billy Hajak's comments. The basic work here is involving a rebuild of the boardwalk to conform it to DEC regulations. The revegetation work that we're proposing is all going to be done in accordance with the DEC. It's going to be an elevated boardwalk, permeable materials, a snow fence, obviously revegetation. For those of you who visited this piece of heaven, you can see it's lovely. With respect to the variances that we're requesting, in reviewing the grounds with respect to no change in character of the neighborhood, this is an existing deck since '88. It was built at a time when coastal erosion and the DEC regulations did not require permitting. The expansion, however, was presumably made by our predecessor in title on the surmise that he no longer needed a permit, notwithstanding the change in the law. There's no other explanation. I've tried to determine from the estate on what basis they made this small addition, and I haven't been able to get any depth here. There's nothing in the records of the village. It's all anecdotal from the prior building inspector, Don Bennett. Is there an alternative feasible? No, I don't believe there is without severe damage to the environment. There's not going to be a change in character of the neighborhood. This is not visible from the shore. We're not adding anything to it. We're just making it compatible with current DEC and environmental requirements. Is the relief substantial? We're seeking to mitigate and restore, and I think Billy has made a good analysis of the re-veg plan and comments, and we've reflected on that and made our plans accordingly. Obviously, the visibility issue is very, very important, as you pointed out, very, very well done in the icon determination. This property and this improvement is not visible from the shore and self-created, not as to this applicant, but obviously we inherited it and we're stuck with it. You have any other questions?
Board members?
Sure.
You referred to Bob Dylan having lived on the property. Was there
No,
a
not
home?
on the property. You see, this property was part of
Okay, that's
a
so can you
house.
get some history of the particular property, because it's confusing.
As an anecdote, he lived there, and when I visited the property, there was one piece of furniture, and it was a hammock in the living room.
What's the history of this property to the extent that you
It
know
was
it?
created before zoning, and it was carved out from the end of Nichols Lane, apparently. In other words, it was created by deed before zoning and planning required you to have subdivision.
So the applicant purchased, it never had a residence, it never had any construction on this other than the
No.
deck? And it was
No.
purchased by the current applicant for a private beach, in 2023,
Right.
for a private beach access, for a parcel that is unbuildable for the
Correct.
purpose of, okay.
That's correct.
So is it the intent of the applicant is this the only intended
Use.
application use of this property by the applicant?
Yes,
Is it-
that's
we're not-
correct. Yes.
So we're not going to see as, to the extent that you are aware, there's not some subsequent application coming for a,
No, this is just access for 128, to have ocean access without having the risk of owning a house on the ocean.
And Nichols Lane was a private road for a long time, right?
At one time.
Yeah, I believe so.
Is this piece of property an actual single and separate piece? It has its own tax map
Yes,
number,
the
so I'm
house-
assuming it is.
The house to the north was the Dillon house, and it became the Nichols house. And when this lot was created, it was basically deeded off between Icon and Ford.
Yeah.
And
And
you
this,
couldn't, Joe, you couldn't build there. I mean,
so would the applicant be prepared to send a letter of covenant that there wouldn't be, there's no intent to build an additional structure or septic or anything?
well,
related?
he doesn't have any intention at the present time. I don't think that we could even come to the building department without coming to you first for some substantial variance, and that's not our present intent. Our present intent is to use it as it's been used since it was created, I don't know how many years ago, 50 years ago, 40 years ago. I mean, I think it's burdensome to anticipate a future use. I mean, I don't think it's necessary. I mean, you've seen this. It's just a little deck and access. It's gated off, so there's no prescriptive rights. But I just don't think that to anticipate. I mean, for instance, he may need, unfortunately, wheelchair access, or he may need to build a ramp. You put a covenant on it now. I mean, you're going to impose restrictions in that respect. I mean, Billy can speak to the fact that it couldn't be eligible for a building permit for anything. It's certainly not habitable space. Right, Billy?
No, without an
I'm just saying.
application, I understand an application would be required for any additional work on the site. It's important in the consideration, I think.
Right.
It's from my perspective, for variance being asked, recognizing as retroactive, not for what's already there, within the parameters of what's already there, as opposed to something, a violation created by the existing property owner. This is something that existed
Yes, right.
prior. But the intent, the consequence of granting the retroactive authorization for what's already there is
Right.
in the context of what the overall character of the area. And if it's hypothetically, one could imagine a future application saying, look, we have this property and there's all these constraints, and
Right.
what a shock that we can't, in order to build some other structure here. So obviously, if it were something that were within the context of what's appropriate, that would be considered on the merits. But but just for the future record, for the record of this application,
There's
in the
no
context
intent,
of our
no.
decision,
There
a clear
is-
statement that there's no intent or anticipation of
Yes,
any of the kind of things that would be problematic.
I represent that, and I will say that as you walk along here and you visit the property, it clearly is in need of, correction, restoration, and also mitigation is very significant here in terms of what needs to be done on the re-veg side and what needs to be done here with respect to the woodwork and the like. It needs to have permeable material. It needs to be raised. I mean, there's all kinds of things that need to be taken care of, and we're going to do that. It hasn't been maintained. I understand your point, Joe, and I agree.
Any other board members?
Yeah, so is the deck also being reconstructed of this? Okay.
Yeah, they're raising it so that the grass can grow on, beach grass can grow under it.
And it will continue, no water, no electric, so that'll,
No, there's no water, no. We have no,
so that could be part of the approval process if
Right.
it's approved.
Any other board members? No. Motion to close the hearing?
So moved.
Second.
thank you.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Rose. Pam?
Application of Mark K. Webb, Suffolk County Tax Map Number 301-9 216 for a wetlands permit and variances in accordance with Chapter 278 zoning and Chapter 163 freshwater wetlands to construct additions and make alterations to the existing residence, construct a pergola, and to legalize retaining walls and a walkway. A freshwater wetlands permit in accordance with Section 163.3 is requested to make alterations to an existing residence, construct a two-story addition, construct a pergola, and to legalize retaining walls and a walkway. Variances of 83.3 feet and 59.1 feet are requested from Section 278.3A8 to construct a pergola, 66.7 feet from wetlands, and to construct a two-story addition 90.9 feet from wetlands, where the required setbacks are 150 feet. A 50-foot variance is required from Section 278.3A8 to legalize retaining walls and a walkway located approximately 135 feet from wetlands, where the required setback is 150 feet. The subject property is 62,902 square feet in size and is located at 123 Egypt Lane with frontage on Hook Pond. The property is located in Residence District R40, and this project is classified as a Type 2 action in accordance with SECRA and requires a New York State Department of Environmental Conservation freshwater wetlands permit.
Morning.
Morning. My name is Thomas Crouch. I'm an attorney representing Mark Webb on the application. I believe the architect, Joseph Pajek, was coming, but I don't see him here yet. But anyway, I'll keep my comments brief and answer any questions from the board. This application is chiefly for a two-story addition 90.9 feet away from the wetlands, and also for a pergola over an existing stone patio, and to legalize retaining walls and walkways in the front yard. The property is almost, if not entirely, within the wetland setback. While the two-story addition is only 90.9 feet away from the wetlands, this is the furthest the structure could be without additional dimensional setback relief. Further, the application increases the lot coverage by only 586 square feet, and there's no increase in the number of bedrooms. With the improvements, the property is still within lot coverage and GFA requirements. Being in the backyard, interior to the garage and pool house, there will be little to no effect on the views from the street and the neighboring properties. As mitigation, we've submitted a revegetation plan prepared by Dewey's Planning for the 10-foot wide no-mow zone, and we propose to upgrade the sanitary system to a low nitrogen system. Both were recommended in Billy's report to the board.
Thank you. Bill, you want to make some comments for us on this application? And then we'll ask the board members.
Good morning, members of the board. Billy Hajak for the Village of East Hampton. Mr. Crouch summarized the application pretty succinctly. I had prepared a memorandum for the board, and that had two recommendations. One was to upgrade the sanitary system to an innovative alternative septic system, which the application didn't propose on the onset, and it appears that they've proposed to do that now. And then the second part was to for revegetation. Right now, most of the property, I'd say about 90% of it, is currently landscaped with ornamental vegetation and lawn. More than half of it is probably within the required setback for clearing, 125-foot setback for landscaping and clearing. And there is a 10-foot wide no-mow zone that runs along the boundary, roughly along the boundary of the wetland, which is associated with the headwaters of Hook Pond. And that area was created as a covenant from a prior zoning board decision. About 7 or 8 years ago, the applicant, it was determined that the no-mow zone had not been maintained. It was being managed and mowed. And the applicant was required to revegetate that no-mow zone, and the revegetation had never really taken. It's basically just grass that hasn't been mowed in a while now. So they're proposing to proactively revegetate it. If the board is inclined, my suggestion would be to try to revegetate a little bit more than the 10-foot wide no-mow zone. It's about a 60,000 square foot lot. Like I said, a substantial portion of it is already manicured. I think it's a good opportunity to try to reestablish, in addition to the area that was already supposed to be a native buffer, is to reestablish a little bit more native buffer. And I think the amount should be, accommodating with the amount of improvement that's proposed here. So I don't have a specific amount in mind, but I do believe that additional revegetation is warranted.
Thank you. Anybody have any questions for Billy before he sits down?
Questions? No.
Just the nature of the revegetation that you're proposing.
I'm not proposing any. I mean, I made a recommendation. Their plan that they've submitted to restore the 10-foot wide buffer area, I think uses a pretty good variety of plant species. It's mostly ferns and grasses. They have some shrubs, sprinkled in there, which is fine.
So it's just the dimensions that you're...
It's just the dimensions that, yeah. And again, a 3-foot wide strip here and there, I don't think is as effective as if they just took a little corner of the property and created a bulk of it as revegetation. The ferns might not do as well if they're taking away lawn, because it's going to be in full sun, so they might want to consider some grasses, but ornamental native grasses would work.
And have they submitted documentation about the sanitary upgrade?
No, just a letter saying that they would offer to upgrade the septic system. So I guess as a condition, you could require they obtain health department approval, county health department approval for the septic upgrade.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Sure.
Billy. Thomas? Any board members like to?
I just have concern about it's such an environmentally sensitive area, and it's very low into the water table, and any expansion of the premises, I feel, is an impact on the environment.
I think it's a win. We're going to get the low nitrogen system. They're going to put it up front on the raised.
Maybe see that, no-mow zone go from 10 feet to 30 feet.
So,
Mr. Rose?
So I would share, I think, all of our concerns about the environmental sensitivity, and this is one where we have to balance the potential value to the environmental context of the septic upgrade, which is significant, and potential expansion of the no-mow buffer area. But within the context of that, though, as you know, I'm often very skeptical of any intrusion into the setback area, to the extent that there's a balancing of benefit. I'm sympathetic to it, but I think it has to be carefully implemented as per Billy's comments and recommendations. And I think the report needs to reflect that, requiring the county health approval and a carefully established expanded buffer.
Do you want to come back to us, talk to your client?
Yes,
We'll keep it open and then...
Yes, please.
I
Thank
also
you
have
very
one
much.
Go ahead, Jimmy.
And maybe Tom can weigh in on this also. The portion of the plans, the first floor where they have off the kitchen, which is a covered kind of porch area, when does this become livable space as opposed to porch if they are proposing full walls and screens/glass replacement sashes or screens, as well as doors? It also appears that they have some type of heaters up in the ceiling. When does that become heated space or livable space? And should that be included in this as GFA?
Here, let me get out of your way.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. So this, in and of itself, is a vague area in our code, whereas screen porches do not specifically, that's where the line is drawn for gross floor area and habitable space. We could look to, perhaps have a better definition, maybe. So right now, to just take what's happening is basically where windows would normally be our screens, and it's probably taking advantage of the code.
The consequence, Tom, of treating this as if it were habitable space would be what in terms of the calculations?
Well, if it were habitable space, it would take it over a 25% expansion, which would automatically trigger the innovative DIA system. I think, we're hard pressed to call it a screen porch, but
So I'll just, this is relevant, I think, in terms of the requirement and the record in terms of the upgrade. If the consequence of treating it as habitable space would be to trigger the innovative sanitary system upgrade, and the applicant is prepared to covenant that there would provide that as a condition of the approval, then it would be, then for the, leaving aside whatever vagaries there may or may not be in the code, for the purpose of this board's action, it would be, the consequence would be as treating it as if it were hypothetically.
correct, and
But
were it to
the
be-
applicants actually, they're
Right.
they're proposing it, yeah.
Addressing, the point is, it's and also precedentially for us, it's an impact that would be mitigated, the consequence would be the same in terms of what we're going to require.
Correct, and if were this to be proposed as gross floor area and not screen porch, it would not exceed the permissible gross floor area.
Right,
So,
that's the way I was getting at.
we'll call it what it is and use it how you like
So
to
we don't
use
have
it.
to,
I mean, we don't
we
need
don't have to determine on the code issue one
We
way
don't.
or the
At
other,
this
but we
point,
do, but the consequence, which would be the triggering the sanitary upgrade is what the effect is.
Right, but I would just recommend, present it as it is going to be used, and because then later on it becomes an enforcement issue because it was not, given a building permit as habitable space, but yet there'll be panels on there, and if I'm not, and there's a possibility of it, I'm not making any,
So with the record being held open, Mr. Chair, if the applicant could speak to that, since the consequence seems to be.
Okay.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you, Tom.
so I think what you want me to speak to is the requirement of the sanitary
Well,
upgrade.
it's just, it's in the response back in terms of, as the inspector said, to not have an enforcement issue, but the intent, the consequence, as I understand it, and defer to the village expertise, would be that it triggers the sanitary requirement. You've indicated that the applicant would agree to the sanitary upgrade, and we don't want to create an enforcement problem if the use is intended to be something other than the screened porch. That should be made clear, and the application should be adjusted accordingly to reflect it. So we're not creating a situation that is imaginary.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's proposed as a screen porch, the proposed use is as a screen porch. I think I make a comment on just the mitigation in general. I originally discussed this application with Billy in May after his inspection, and he recommended revegetation of the current no-mow zone and an upgraded sanitary system. Our discussion was, he thought it was required. I wasn't sure, so I checked with Tom, and Tom's opinion was based on the plans as submitted. It's not required, but his recommendation was to agree to it, and I agree with that as voluntary mitigation. So I think the idea of enlarging the no-mow zone, I think Billy, and I'm not trying to speak for him, but I think that came out later when he thought maybe we weren't going to volunteer to upgrade the sanitary system. So we are volunteering to upgrade the sanitary system. I think that's appropriate for this application. And I think that really that along with revegetating the current no-mow zone should mitigate the impact from this application. I can obviously have a discussion with my client about.
Yeah, if you reach out to Billy too, because Billy's not proposing that you just do a complete no-mow zone as it is now. There's, you had pockets of it, right? You had little renderings that he thought would be good. So reach out to Billy.
And I mean, there's a significant nexus between the environmental impact that addition will have and being so low in the water table and having the wetlands. You basically have the nature trail in your backyard.
Right, I understand that. Right. Any other questions?
No, we'll leave this open until next meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just have a
Thank you.
question for Billy.
Go ahead.
Billy, does the 30 feet sound appropriate to you as far as in your expert opinion?
As I indicated, the wetland is a circuitous line through the backyard that comes up along the north side of the property. So I don't necessarily, I'm not suggesting just a blanket 30-foot, setback from the wetland boundary, because I think that'll create a very unusual area in his backyard. I'm suggesting maybe just pick an isolated corner of the property and, get a more suitable chunk of area that could be revegetated versus just continuing the circuitous line around the periphery of the property. So, I think it would be more benefit. You're more likely to see compliance that way versus having a crazy circuitous line through the property, and it doesn't impinge on, the usable one area as much. So.
Okay, thanks, Billy. Thanks, Thomas. We'll, till next month, thank you. Okay, Pam, let's move on to the next hearing.
Application of Russell J. DeGate and Maureen R. Sharp, Sub-County Tax Map Number 301-1416 for area variances from Chapter 238 zoning to legalize a slate patio and coverage. Variances of 8.9 feet and 7.6 feet are requested from Section 278 3A 5B to legalize a slate patio located 1.1 feet and 2.4 feet from the rear yard lot lines where required rear yard setbacks are 20 feet. A 156-square-foot variance is requested from Section 278 3A 9A to legalize 1,490 square feet of coverage, where 1,334 square feet is the maximum permitted coverage. The subject property is 4,168 square feet in area and is located at 7 Cheryl Road in Residence District R40. This project is classified as a Type 2 action in accordance with SECRA.
Good morning, Russell.
Good morning.
Pam's got to swear you in.
Oh, yes. Yes. Raise your right hand and address for the record.
Russell DeGate, 7 Cheryl Road, East Hampton, New York.
You swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing?
Good morning, committee members, and thank you for allowing me to come and talk a little bit about our application. I'll start a little bit with the history. About 3 years ago, my partner and I, Norianne Sharp, bought the property at 7 Cheryl Road, and we proceeded to start to do what every homeowner does, which is upgrade and make things your own. And what we had when we originally bought the property was in the northwest corner of the property was a 10 by 10 pea gravel patio. We took and looked at that, and in the back of the house there's a stairway that came down, and the stairway came down to basically open grass that then kind of went off until the patio was detached. So we thought a great idea would be to let's attach the stairway to a patio, and we contracted a stone layer to create a slate patio. When we did that, we asked if there are any rules or regulations we had to address. The answer was that it wasn't a permanent structure, so it's okay. And human nature being what it is, we got the answer we wanted. We built the patio. So now we have a patio, and just recently we put a portico on the house and got the building permit, et cetera, built that. And to get the CO, we had to get the land resurveyed. They picked up on the clear violation of the setbacks and of the total coverage. So again, that's why we're here. We put in a request for an appeal and a waiver of those, or modification of those. So to go into exactly the questions that got asked on the application, there are no undesirable changes that occurred. The patio is in the northwest corner of the property. It is enclosed by both a fence on one side with one neighbor and trees and skip laurels and things on the other. We're not within 25 feet of either of the homes. We've spoken to both neighbors, and they have no issue with the patio at all. As to whether or not it could be put someplace else, if you look at the survey, the lot is very small, and if you look at other places to do it. This is the best place because it's out of the way of the neighbors and everybody else. So the location is, makes sense from an aesthetic point of view. Whether the variance requested is substantial, I don't know. That's something that this board is much better to answer than we. It's roughly 11.7% over our maximum coverage. Obviously, if you ask me, that's not substantial, but we'll see. And again, there have been no issues with neighbors or anybody else, and that's our story.
Thank you. Board members, any questions? Mr. Rose?
So in your opening statement, you referred that you asked if permits were required, and you were told no, and that was from the person, from the contractor who was doing the work.
Exactly.
Right, so.
Exactly. But again, it's my fault.
No,
I mean, no due diligence.
This is not the first time we've heard an explanation being that the contractor said X, Y, or Z was okay, and then we're asked to retroactively approve it. This is, in my, and just want to be clear that the slate patio, as inspector has indicated, is in fact a permanent structure, is therefore not permitted and does require a variance, and the sort of retroactive granting of indulgences is something some of us, at least on the board,
understand
are
that.
skeptical of. But you've indicated, and recognizing the size and the constraints of this property and the fact that it was a genuine, appears to be a genuine misunderstanding of the rules. Like, you've indicated that the neighbors have no problem with it.
None.
I know we ordinarily, the notice is always sent out, but I would just request that we get something affirmative. I mean, if we can have an actual communication prior to our vote.
You submitted an affidavit that he served as required?
Right,
Then you know.
I know they've been served. I'm just saying, we don't have, I don't think we have as part of our package any indication. And in this case, since you indicated that they have no issue, it would be great to have that as part of our approval, so, because it does go
We've
to
spoken
the
to
nature
both,
of
and that
character.
should not be an issue.
So,
So if you-
Then perhaps you can submit an affidavit, just advising who you've noticed, what kind of notice you gave, mailing, whatever it might be, and who you spoke with, and we can make it part of the record.
Okay, that'll be
Okay.
fine.
So we're going to leave the,
Well, I got some.
Go ahead, Phil.
I have
Sorry.
some concerns. It's a very small lot. That area floods frequently, so any additional hard surface adds to that, as opposed to having a permeable surface. The setback variance is substantial, and the coverage variance is substantial. So those are the comments I have.
thank you. So we'll keep the hearing open for written comments only, so you can submit your affidavits, and it'll be next month. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to recuse myself from the last two hearings, and Mr. McMullen will be the chair.
Pam, can you read the notice?
Sorry, is he ready? I didn't hear you, sorry.
Yes,
Okay.
please.
Application of Skylight East LLC, Suffolk County Tax Map Number 301-12510 for a freshwater wetlands permit in accordance with the standards set forth in Section 163.3 of the Village Code, and a temporary variance from Section 278.388 to permit the continued existence of approximately 185 linear feet of wildlife fencing to temporarily remain within and directly adjacent to wetlands, where a 150-foot setback is required. The subject property is 133,502 square feet in area, located at 94 Appaquag Road, and is in Residence District R160. The property fronts on Georgia Pond, and this project is classified as a Type 2 action in accordance with SECRA. I guess I have to swear you in, right? Please raise your right hand and state your name and address for the record.
Charles Bowman, Land Use Ecological Services, 570 Expressway Drive South, Medford, New York.
You swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I absolutely do.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, members of the board. This project, as you well know, has gone on now for 5 years. We're in our 5th year of this really major Phragmites removal project and revegetation of the pond edge and upland area. It's actually going very well. We've submitted reports as required at the end of every year. The deer fencing we have found has been an integral part of the success of getting native vegetation growing there, which we have exceeded the 85% guarantees within the restoration area. We still continue to work in there. This is the last year of our monitoring requirements and actually the last year of any revegetation requirements. But this year and this spring, we've been adding new plants, dividing some of the plants that are there. So we've exceeded the area coverage, but the deer browse, as I'm sure the board knows, is a huge problem. It's a huge problem everywhere. Along the pond edge, where there is no deer exclusion fencing, we've had no success. The deer walk by and they basically browse anything that you put there. Within the fence area, we've had a tremendous amount of success, but that's due to our monitoring and also a lot of work as a part of making sure any of the invasive weed species like mugwort are taken out by hand, garlic mustard, a whole bunch of other ones. So we've been hand pulling that. It's worked out really well. But like I say, the deer fencing, we intend to answer the questions that Billy has raised. We would intend to keep it there for the remainder of this growing season. The temporary irrigation that's in there, we would remove at the end of this growing season. And at the end of this growing season, I think the question arises as how would you relocate the deer fence to protect that buffer area? And that's something we're really going to have to look at the end of this growing season. We know that it will have to be relocated probably into the buffer area somewhat to make it more compliant. But it's still, I believe, going to be necessary where the owner is willing to keep on looking at maintaining it. I mean, it's actually terrific how it turned out, as did the no-mow zone that's adjacent to it. So we're not proposing any new work. We're basically proposing maintaining what we have there. And also, we have no problem with providing in the spring an as-built survey showing where we've relocated the deer fence and also photographs, documentation. And like I say, our requirement, I'm speaking from land use, is basically over after this 5th year that we're into. But we'd still want to make sure that the project remains a success, which it is. So that's why I think any of these projects on Georgia Pond take a very intense amount of work. We're actually very fortunate that we have clients that are willing to go ahead and can afford to do this work. But in the end, you're creating some very good habitat that is there. But the deer, what can I say? I think everybody that lives on the East End has the same problem everywhere. So that would be our request, that we would you'd approve this temporary variance and allow us to come back after this growing season, document that the irrigation's been removed, and provide an as-built of where we're suggesting the fence be relocated and how then to move forward with it. But Billy's been very helpful with working with Kelly from my office, and I think between all of us, it's also been a learning experience on how to get this all done correctly.
Great.
Thank you. Billy, can you just kind of reiterate what you gave the board and your recommendations?
Morning, Billy Hajek for the Village. Yeah, as Mr. Bowman indicated, it is fairly straightforward. The original permit for Phragmites removal did not include a condition allowing for the wildlife exclosures. As a policy, where it's not written into the permit, we've allowed for 2 years of a growing season to, two growing seasons to, give the vegetation a chance to survive. We're well past the 2 growing seasons at this point. And so we just can't let the fence exist in a wetland without, memorializing it in some way. And, for a long-term plan, I don't think we want to leave fences, within the wetland. I mean, just the long-term impacts if everybody does a buffer plan, which would be great in Georgia Pond, you'd end up with fences along the entire shoreline of Georgia Pond, which, may not be such a great consequence of that. So Mr. Bowman answered 2 of the questions. We just need a plan showing where they're going to relocate the fence. And, the board will have to entertain that as a relief for a permanent fence fixture.
So if I can just ask, I want to be clear, what you're saying is as part of this approval, we should identify where the fence is going to go, as opposed to, I think the testimony indicated, we'll come back and talk about it.
Yeah, no, I think I would recommend the board approves a plan that shows where the fence is going to be relocated and conditions the approval on, the conditions that I suggested.
Establishing that subsequent to the additional
Correct.
growing season.
Yes.
That makes sense to me.
I agree. I don't know, what do you think, Phil?
Yeah, no, I agree. So maybe the applicant can come back with a plan on where they think the fence
Yeah, I
should go.
think the only reason that I was suggesting the end of this growing season is because we're still doing some additional plantings, and wherever we relocate the fence to, we want to make sure that that fits in to the best place. So I have no problem submitting the plan, but I certainly would like to get through this growing season with the irrigation and the plantings to be able to do that.
I think it would be good that if maybe you provided us with a plan now, and if at the end of this growing season, if there is a modification to the fence that you'd like to do, is maybe submit another application. At least then we have Billy checking and making sure that everything is.
Just to also speak to the 2 to 3 years normal, I think every project's different, and and if you can keep that irrigation going, and if it takes 4 years, 5 years, I think the board should just keep that in mind in future projects.
Well, the clear sense seems to be that we want to get it right. And
Correct.
so that's-
Absolutely.
if you
Billy,
could- we're going
again,
to hold the hearing open pending a submission of a plan.
Yeah.
Yes.
We've been working great together, so, that's the problem. But, everybody
we
wants
appreciate
it to be
that.
a success,
We don't always get that.
Okay.
So let's keep the hearing open until next month, and at what time we'll get a new plan, and we'll be able to close the hearing at that time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Next, Pam.
Application of the Jewish Center of the Hamptons, Suffolk County Tax Map Number 301-8746 for a special permit and variances in accordance with Chapter 278 zoning to construct accessory structures. A special permit is requested pursuant to Section 278-7D1B to construct a pavilion structure over a proposed patio and install planters. A 24.7-foot variance is required from Section 278 3E1 to construct a patio and pavilion structure 25.3 feet from the rear yard lot line where the required transitional rear yard setback is 50 feet. Variances of 70 feet are requested from Section 278 3A3A to install multiple planters on and directly adjacent to the front yard lot line where the required front yard setback is 70 feet. A 869 square foot variance is required from section 278-3A9 to permit 30,321 square feet of coverage, where a prior variance granted 29,452 square feet of coverage. The maximum permitted coverage by zoning is 29,129 square feet. The subject property is 145,643 square feet in area and is located at 44 Woods Lane. The property is located in Residence District R80 and contains a special permit use identified as the Jewish Center of the Hamptons. This project requires approval of the Design Review Board and is classified as an unlisted action in accordance with SECRA.
Thank you. Morning, Alex.
Morning, everybody. Alex Folsom here with the Jewish Center. I'm also joined by our Rabbi Josh Franklin, who would like to say give some comments as well after I introduce the project. Also here with architect Richard Datner and our landscape architect Alex Bludorn from LaGuardia Design, and Mike Brody from Crescendo Designs in Southampton, who'll speak about sound and speakers. I'm also here with Stephen Schwartz, one of our board members, and the president of our board, Harry Katz. And Pam introduced the project and read the relief we're requesting. And since our initial application, we did make some modifications. As you know, we moved the pavilion out of the transitional yard setbacks 25 feet closer to the sanctuary, so that in addition to now not needing that relief, that 25 feet of relief, it also decreased the length of the walkway from the sanctuary to the pavilion, which also in turn decreased the amount of coverage. So we're asking for 486 square feet of coverage instead of the 800 something square feet of coverage relief. Part of that coverage relief is due to the security planters that we're looking to install, 14 security planters up front within the existing vegetation or hedgerow along Woods Lane. Those security planters were provided and paid for by the Department of Homeland Security. They are, Alex Bludorn will talk to more about how we're hiding them in a sense, but they are unfortunately a necessary security measure. I do also want to point out, I submitted this fancy map to you, Jill. So obviously we have the Jewish Center here. In the center, there goes the two of the adjacent properties are also owned by the Jewish Center, here on the east side and on the north side where the rabbi lives. We also submitted letters of support from the other two adjacent neighbors, from 56 Woods and from from Nina Runsdorf here. So again, all the adjacent neighbors have submitted letters of support. On this map that we submitted, we also highlighted the distance from the houses, particularly on Borden Lane, where we recognize we've received some pushback to the project. Again, just looking to highlight the rather large distances from the pavilion to the neighboring houses. And obviously, for those of you who have been to the property, you saw all the structures, the fencing, the vegetation, the distance between where this pavilion is going to go and the non-adjoining neighbors. I want to speak to how this project came to be. It's a product of the pandemic. The seed was planted for this project during that time when obviously worshiping together inside was either not possible or a frightening possibility for some of the congregants. So the Jewish Center assembled a medical committee made of doctors and medical professionals, not just within our congregation, but from across the community. And this was the conclusion that they reached was whether the need for outdoor worship will arise at some point in the future, whether it's through different variations of COVID that worsen or another pandemic that's coming down the pike, and here we are with this proposal. So that was the primary need for it. Obviously, as you know, the primary use of this will be for outdoor services, religious services. The idea is to be anyone who could have been in the sanctuary. The design of this is to facilitate, the same congregation. This is not in that regard, it's not an expansion of use. This is not going to equate to more members. This is, it's not overflow or anything like that. There will, something like this, as with any structure, in a sanctuary can have other uses. The rabbi will speak to some of those potential other uses. Look, I want to say that I think this project is beautiful and it's in a tranquil setting. Obviously, I think the obvious concern here would be a loud wedding, a boozy celebration with a DJ. I just want to say I think most people would agree. I don't think that this is a setting that draws people to that use. That is not the goal here. Again, the rabbi will speak to some of the other proposed uses, but I guess I'll leave it at that. But we don't have commercial kitchen space here. It's not for rent for non-congregants. It's used only for members of the Jewish Center, and generally speaking, it's not going to generate any additional traffic. So the other thing I think that's worth pointing out is obviously the village has a special event permit application and process. I would say that if the village determined that let's say something outside beyond the scope of a regular religious service were proposed here and it had more than 50 people and the village said, well, you would have to submit that permit, I don't think we would disagree with that position based on reading the code and what's required and who has to submit those permits. So with that, I think before we answer any questions, again, I'd like to allow the respective parties to give more details to our application. So I'll invite the rabbi up to speak first.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Please raise your right hand
Sure.
and state your name and address for the record.
Josh Franklin, 50 Woods Lane, East Hampton.
Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Again, Josh Franklin, I'm the neighbor of the Jewish Center of the Hamptons at 50 Woods and also serve as the rabbi of the Jewish Center. You might know that a little bit later today we'll have an outdoor worship service at Main Beach because outdoor worship has been really integral, especially during the pandemic, to enable us to reach our community and to create a sense of worship and spirituality in the Hamptons. Part of our philosophy is to be able to utilize the best attributes of the Hamptons in everything that we do at the Jewish Center, and that, of course, includes worship. So Shabbat on the Beach is a place for us that draws a great deal of our community, and that's been an institution at the Jewish Center of the Hamptons for some time. Of course, though, during the pandemic, we had to expand a little bit in how we worshiping outside because it was unsafe to worship inside at the Jewish Center of the Hamptons. We currently have a small patio in the back that we used on numerous occasions to have particular worship celebrations. We have taken or had taken a lot of what it is that we typically do and moved it outside. Of course, we didn't have a lot of the infrastructure that we needed in order to do a lot of the regular things that we would do inside. So, for example, a Passover Seder, which we have every year at the time of Passover, where we have people indoors at the Jewish Center. That would actually also be a potential usage of a communal gathering space at the Jewish Center under the new proposed pavilion. On top of that, the occasional Shabbat dinner here and there, being able to host our congregants in a setting for a dinner, and perhaps even a summer luncheon as alternative community gathering uses that we would have at the Jewish Center under the pavilion. I will say that we're a small seasonal community, and what that means is that we are not the wedding factory, bar mitzvah factory that you might get from a typical New York City congregation. We do about 5 or 6 bar mitzvahs each year, and we do about 2 on-site weddings each year for our members. We don't have a lot of usage, and I would imagine that the typical usage of our space that we're building outside is not going to be used for those type of events, most of which end up taking place off-site anyways because of the reception halls that are available in the area, Parish Art Museum, Bridgehampton Surf and Tennis, Montauk Downs, and other facilities that our congregants typically do use for their receptions. This doesn't see, it's not really going to be designed and even imagined as the kind of space that would do that. But I will say that the proposal of the structure, we really do hope to have outdoor worship services during the season when the weather is appropriate, outside, in place of being in our sanctuary, because we know that it will radically enhance the spirituality of our community, and that our community has responded incredibly well to outdoor worship at the Jewish Center of the Hamptons, and we're really excited about this idea. We think it'll not just be great for our community, we think it'll be a great addition to the East Hampton community as a whole. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
I just had some questions. So, so you do a couple of weddings and a few bar mitzvahs a year, and does the celebration then follow at the Jewish Center, or typically that goes off-site?
Typically, those go off-site.
Okay. And then you mentioned the services at Main Beach that you do. Would the sound level be similar? I'm
going to let our sound person speak to the sound levels that are proposed, but the system that I know that we are proposing in the structure is completely different from whatever sound instruments or speakers we would be using at the beach.
Okay, thank you. And Lisa, I had one question for you. How many special permits can a establishment get over the course of a year? Is there a limit?
I don't know that there's a limit. I'd have to check that. I can get back to you.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Alex, do you have someone else that would like to speak now?
I guess I'll MC the introductions. Richard Detner, our architect.
Thank you.
Do I swear that all my architectural opinions are the truth? Nothing but the truth?
Right, and state your name and address for the record.
Richard Datner, 180 Cabrini Boulevard, New York, New York.
Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do, to any factual thing that I refer to. My architectural opinions may be subjective. So it's great to be here for it's really an exciting and very personal project for me. I've had a home in Amagansett for 55 years. I've been a member of the congregation in its early days. And I was a colleague of Norman Jaffe, who was the architect for this superb structure, the Jewish Center, which in my subjective opinion is one of the most beautiful places of worship, modern places of worship, not only a synagogue, but of any denomination. The synagogue is actually named the Gates of the Grove, because part of Norman's vision was to create behind the synagogue a grove of beautiful trees which have now grown to spectacular height. And interestingly, our landscape architect, Alex is here, but Chris LaGuardia's firm, Chris worked with Norman Jaffe, so both I and the landscape architect feel that we're continuing this beautiful tradition that was built. So my task was to design an outdoor pavilion, which you can see here, to mirror and echo the beauty and the character of the actual sanctuary. I'm at a point in my career when I can spend time actually building models, and I built this myself. I'm the only person in the office who doesn't use the 3D prototyping machine but I still know how to wield an X-Acto knife and Elmer's glue with great skill. So this is actually a scale model of the pavilion proposed. It echoes Norman's structure. If any of you, those of you who've been in it, know that it's a group of sloping roofs facing north, this is north, glazed on the north side, so you get the most incredible north light all day long. That's really the essence of this space, is as you come in the daytime, you're uplifted by the sense of the natural light echoing and bouncing off the Alaskan yellow cedar, the materiality, which is the other really key factor in the beauty of the sanctuary. We plan to echo that materiality. This pavilion is entirely built out of wood, out of laminated beams. We're not cutting down beautiful old growth trees to create this. It's a glue laminated series of girders. Small members, really almost the size of 2x8s, are glued together in a press under heat and create these beams. Some of these will be 65 feet long. The whole structure will be built off-site, which will really minimize any work and construction at the site. And all these pieces will come to the site, many of them pre-assembled. The only thing that we have to do at the site is the foundations for the four of these columns, which are like man-made trees, actually. They are a man-made replica of the nature that's actually there. There is a small connection between the pavilion and the synagogue, so if it's raining or if it's very hot out, you can walk to it. The north side will be glazed. I'm sorry, I was saying the only thing at the site will be the four foundations for these four trees. The drainage, all the roofs are drained through pipes that will come down through the center of these columns, and the dry wells, which will return all the rainwater back to the ground. So that is the building in the Grove. The one I've seen some of the 2 letters of objection. I can answer one of them, I think, and our acoustic expert will answer the other. So the question was, what kind of lights? We are aiming for a light level, maybe a little more than this, of about 20-foot candles, which will be sufficient for congregants to read a prayer book. We're not looking for a brilliant, overlit space. I mean, I have in my house in Amagansett, I have a telescope on the roof, and I get very angry when my neighbor turns on their driveway lights because it blocks my view of the stars. I'm a great proponent of a darker sky than we have now. So we presently show 44 small fixtures. They look like this. They'll be LED fixtures, probably 9 volts each, and they will be on dimmers so that we can keep just the right amount of light for the Seder, if people are reading the Haggadah, or a prayer book. There's absolutely no intention to overlight the space. And our next presenter, Alex Bludorn, will talk about the landscaping which will surround this. I can say, I think truthfully, that I don't think any neighbor 420 feet away will see any light at night, when perhaps in the winter, when probably this pavilion will not be used, and there are no leaves on the trees, you might get a glimmer of light from that distance. But certainly in the summer, with the existing houses and hedges and the planting that you'll hear about in a moment, I don't think anybody will see any light from this structure. Happy to answer any questions.
Does anybody have any questions at this time?
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Alex Bludorn from LaGuardia Design. I'm going to ask him to speak to our landscaping plan and the full premise lighting.
Alex Bludorn, LaGuardia Design Group, 38 Scuttle Hole Road, Watermill.
You swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
So I'll touch on the landscape that we're creating directly around the pavilion, and then some additional planting that we're doing along the property line on the north side of the property. So in terms of the trees, you'll see on the plan to my right, those green circles are all Sweet Bay magnolia, which is a native magnolia tree that we picked because of its light dappled foliage. So it's not going to compete with a lot of the trees that are already on the property, which is more or less an arboretum at this point. But it'll give a nice softening of the structure on all four corners of it. Underneath that, we have Pachysandra and boxwoods. So it's a very limited plant palette that we chose in part for native trees, but also for deer resistance, because this property is not fully compliant with fencing and all of that. So in the past, deer have done a number on the understory, and especially along the north property line on the existing privet that separates the property from the common driveway behind. So along that north property line, we are proposing a hedgerow of Great Western Arborvitae going in at 10 feet tall. And so that'll do a considerable benefit to the neighbors to the north over time as it continues to grow, and for the sheer fact that it's an evergreen versus a privet that's currently there now in half-eaten form, truthfully. In terms of the landscape lighting directly around the pavilion, all we are doing is small path lighting. So it's really just for wayfinding, and it's a small L stick. You can see it on the bottom right corner of that drawing over there, but it's 20 inches tall, completely shielded, dark skies compliant, very minimal casting of light, really just at the ground plane so that people can get to and from safely. We're going a step above that on the entire property and taking a lot of the existing PAR floodlights that are on the property and converting those all to dark sky compliant fixtures, fully shielded and all pointing light down. So that would be all of the existing lights that are on the trees and as well as the post-mounted lights around the parking area, making those all fully shielded downlights. And then just to touch on the security planters that Alex Balsam mentioned earlier, the idea there is to not see them at all. So we are going to be putting them strategically within the existing planting that parallels 27, right along that south property line. And we may need to do a little bit of additional planting in front of a few of them, but I would say almost all of them will be completely screened and hidden so that you'll never know that they were actually there.
Excellent. Does your plan show, I believe Alex mentioned that pavilion was being pulled away from the neighbor's property, or from the property line?
Yep.
Is that accurate now, showing, or is that going to actually be closer to the building?
I'll step into that one, actually. Funny you mentioned that, Jim, because I noticed that while Alex was starting his presentation, that's not the most current map there that's mounted, actually. Yeah.
I just want to make sure that I'm seeing it right.
No,
yeah.
We caught it at the same time.
Okay.
I don't know. We have a lot of chefs in the kitchen, I guess.
That's it. That's it. Does anybody else have any questions?
I had wanted to hear from their sound.
Right?
All right.
Okay.
I mean, I didn't.
No, that's good. But not least, Mike Brody from Crescendo in Southampton. He's going to speak to sound and speakers and address those.
Great. Thank you. Yeah.
Good afternoon, Board. I was waiting for this. Mike Brody, 93 Evergreen Avenue, East Mauritius, New York,
You swear to tell the
11940.
truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. So I'm from Crescendo Designs in Southampton. I've been working there, designing and implementing audio-video systems for over 20 years. A lot of people call me the AV guy, so I don't take offense anymore to that. I used to. The Jewish Center of the Hamptons called upon me to ask and speak about a design for an audio speaker system for the pavilion. The main objectives of this system were to, first and foremost, not disturb the neighbors of the surrounding area. The second item was to provide uniform sound coverage to all the people inside the pavilion. And the last item that we had talked about was to make sure things look nice in the pavilion, and that's the easy part that we have. So the main thing that I want to just point out on the board that we have over there, thank you for being my PowerPoint, is we've identified 12 speaker locations inside the pavilion that are going to point down at the listeners inside the pavilion. A lot of people ask why so many speakers. I'm going to address that. I'm going to very quickly. The more points of sound that we have inside the pavilion, the lower that we can play sound or music or speech from a speaker, and the easier it is for people locally to hear. So going also through with our plan is not only the multiple speaker points, but the electronics and the technology that amplifies the speakers. So we'll be using amplification that is going to limit the output of the speakers to specific decibel levels. This means how loud the speakers can actually play. So we're going to cap that so we never get quote unquote too loud. The other thing that we'll be doing with these electronics is we're going to be able to adjust the frequency response of the speakers. And you'll see as I get more into sound here, what that means is we're going to be able to adjust the bass level, particularly that the speakers output. So our next slide that we have over here, really, we're going to just talk briefly about sound and the principles of sound and why this all makes sense. So first thing to note is sound travels in the air as waves of energy. Okay? If you could see sound, it looks like the small graph that we have there, where the top is treble, very small waves, and as you go down to bass, it's very long waves, extremely long waves. I like to think of this as if you were by a pond and you took a pebble and you dropped the pebble in the water, you notice the very small ripples of a small pebble. That's like what treble is like, the high frequencies we have. And as we go down the chain here, the mid-range, or like my voice right now, might be a larger pebble, and when we drop that, the waves are a little bit bigger. Now, the thing that is the largest wave of sound is bass. This would be like taking a large rock. Let's say we took a brick. We drop that in the pond, makes very big waves. And those waves travel a lot longer. Next slide, please. So I don't know where everybody's from and where you've grown up, but many people have experienced this long wave of bass, particularly from cars. And, you know, I'm sort of guilty of this as a kid. We would have subwoofers in our cars, and the subwoofers made very loud bass. The car would come around the corner of your block, you would hear boom, 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 boom. When the car pulls in front of you, that's when you hear what the actual song was.
And your car?
It was probably my car. Yeah, I was probably the offender. But the reality here is those bass waves are what sounds really loud, and you hear them first because they carry through the most distance. And as you'll see, and as we note here, what we're looking to do electronically is we're going to cut out some of this bass that's very disturbing, if you will. So it won't travel, and we won't have that same type of experience from our speakers that we place in the pavilion. So the next slide, pretty much I just summed most of that up, but the bass has the long waves, and the voice, string instruments, brass, much shorter waves. Again, going back to the stone, pebbles, and the brick. So the other part of the solution that I touched upon before really was the frequency response in trying to control this bass from the speaker, and we'll do that electronically. So we'll be limiting the wavelength in the amplifier to eliminate frequencies below what's called 60 hertz. And it's meaningfully limiting the distance that the sound is going to travel, that annoying sound, we're going to call it. So if we remove all those frequencies, the distance of the sound will only travel, according to math, 9.5 feet. In our graph here, if we roll off down here, frequency 60 and 70 hertz there, our wavelength there is a maximum of 16.10 feet. So in other words, what we're looking to do with our speakers, we don't want to have big rocks. We don't want to have big bricks. We don't want to cause big waves. So we're going to ensure smaller waves are coming out of the speaker so sound doesn't carry as far. Next slide, please.
May I just ask a question?
Yes, ma'am.
Wouldn't the level of the bass be determined by what's being played through the speaker?
It's a good question. So that's the source. So if we have source material, so let's say I'm going to play AC/DC, right? And I'm playing some rock music and it has bass in it. What we're going to do to that song is we're going to truncate the bass in that. So effectively, I'm not recreating the most realistic experience for that AC/DC song. Okay, so that the source, which is before the speaker, or my voice perhaps, or the song, I'm going to roll that off, so we're going to take and strip out the bass that is really offensive to that song. We won't hear it.
So does that affect, when the rabbi's speaking, will that affect his voice?
Another good question. So most of these very low bass frequencies, if we looked back at the frequency 2 slides ago, we have 40 to 100 hertz bass there. And if we roll off approximately at 60, many of the sounds below 60 are not something that the human voice is really creating, right? It gets to a point where like it's a bass drum or electronic bass that you hear in music, or an incredibly loud sound like a massive stone dropping in the city, like I was at a construction site yesterday. So the human voice, my voice, would not really change at all from the speakers. But these tones that are, let's say, annoying, like coming out of the car with that system, or I don't want to profile music, but rap music or hip hop, something like that, typically has a very deep bass energy. That would be rolled off by the speakers, so that heavy bass is not traveling, but it won't disturb like the rabbi's voice,
okay,
or even the enjoyment of the song.
Okay.
Right? Good question, though. So the next topic really of sound and how to control sound in a location like this is to understand volume and decibels. So volume and decibels, this graph here, I have an application on my phone that I'm just going to pull up. And this phone right now, it's reading decibels, okay, that are close to me. You see the numbers going up and down. And it's a measurement to tell us how loud something is by using an instrument, if you will. So here, you know, right now, my speech this close away reached 80, a frequency that I'm producing reached 80. Most of the frequencies are, 60 in that range to 70. But on our chart here, 60 is normal conversation, 70 might be a high-power vacuum cleaner. So this is the measurement of how loud something is about a meter away from the actual sound source or the speaker. So it allows us to provide math and a numerical value to tell you how loud something is in dB. So now we're going to go to another little technical item about sound. It's called the inverse square law. This is where we're going to understand when I was speaking about just dropping the rocks in the pond and they create this circular wave that dissipates over length. This is the formula that they use for sound to understand how distance affects sound. So the energy twice as far as the source is spread over 4 times the area. Okay, throw that aside. The simple words, every time that the distance from the speaker source is doubled, there's a drop of 6 dB from the speaker. So as we follow the example on the slide on the right, you'll see if we start with a source at 80 decibels, measured at 1 meter. If we move 2 meters away, it'll drop to 74 dB. If we double that, get to 4 meters, 68, so on and so forth. So sound, as we mentioned with the rock analogy and dropping that in that puddle, all right, over the distance, the waves flatten out, and eventually they go away. And the inverse square law allows us to predict with distance and sound.
So start with 80 decibels, go 100, 120 feet out. What's our decibel level?
Well, technically, you go down to 0 at that point. So in the next slide that I have here, discussing more the inverse square law, the easiest way to think about it is that, I'm going to start from the top here, which we'll explain. There's math that's involved, and I'm going to skip all the math and just understand that at every foot is roughly minus 1 dB. So 120 feet away from that sound that was 80 dB, would be technically negative, but there's no real negative sound. You just won't hear something at that area. So the inverse square law utilizes physics to describe how sound propagates, which is a technical word for how sound travels. And going back to some of the math, I'm sorry, I skipped ahead just to answer your question.
No, that's great.
It's negative 3D per meter from the source is how we understand how the sound is going to dissipate there. And then if we use feet, it's about negative 1 dB per foot of distance. So taking this into context here at the pavilion, if a maximum volume of 90 dB is being produced by one of the speakers or all of the speakers, and you stood 50 feet from that speaker, so we walk 50 feet away from the nearest speaker, we'll call it, the sound pressure, or the dB, is approximately going to be 40 from that distance. Okay, it's 1 foot, negative 1 dB, which is approximately the same level as wind noise at that point in time. If you look back on the little chart that they have to the right, I know it's hard to see. The backgrounds at all 3 locations, where the pavilion are, the property line, and board and lane, if you went and you used my little tool to measure there without people speaking, you'd see it at probably about 50 dB, as people have measured it before.
I have one question.
Please.
If you say that a speaker is putting out 80 dBs, if you go and now have 17 speakers, are you still looking at that 80 dBs?
Yes. They're all putting out 80 dBs.
So because there's multiple speakers, it's not multiplying that from
Correct.
80 to 160 to 320 to...
Yes, very good question. What it's doing with all those speakers, so if they're all putting out 80 dBs, it would be like, let's take 6 of me in this room and put me in the corners or close to you. I can speak lower in volume in dB for you to hear me. Then I have to speak louder for everybody to hear me. So if I go back here, the more I move away from you, this is going to continue to change. So the same concept with the pavilion, is we have multiple points of sound at a low volume level, means that the people close to the speaker are going to hear it very easily. It also means that people far away from the pavilion, the sound is going to start low, so we're already in a good spot. And the other item is that since we're truncating the bass, we're taking some of those offensive tones that tend to go further because of their waves out of the picture as well.
And when you say truncating the bass, the user can't turn that off or change that?
They can't adjust that.
So they can't?
No, they don't have the ability like on your, let's call it a receiver at home, where you can adjust treble and bass. So the electronics, the amplification, are set up digitally. And this is something that like a professional would do like us. And we'd say every frequency that comes out of that speaker is limited at this particular frequency. Anything that goes below this is not happening from there. And at the same time, we could set up that electronic, in this particular case, to cap the decibels or the max volume of those speakers. So this way, nobody can go there and go, and then get to levels something like, let's say, a live band may produce. So a live band would be much louder than this, and they'd be one point of sound as opposed to many. So the next slide that we have is talking about distances from the pavilion, and distance is important here. The closest distance is 20 Borden Lane, 365 feet away. So when we talked about our calculations of sound and the dB loss, et cetera, distance is our friend here. It's going to be difficult for us if we cap things and if we adjust the base here for really any annoyance to happen to the neighbors. I just wanted to note that the 4 contiguous properties here, they support the construction of the pavilion. Finally, last slide here really is just a recap. The 12 speakers that we have positioned, the more speakers correlates with the lower playback volume that we'll be able to achieve because we have a lot of speakers. I've explained this more in my history of doing this to people and homeowners as well than you can imagine, because nobody has ever come to me and said, you know, can I have a lot of speakers in a room? Or can I have a lot of speakers in an area? Everybody immediately assumes that, hey, let's put 2 speakers in here. But what really happens then? You turn those 2 speakers up very, very loud for people to hear across the room. And if you've ever been to a wedding or a DJ where they have 2 speakers and subwoofers by the front, if you're dancing up there, you have to go like this. And then you go all the way to the corner of the room or whatever, you sit down at a table, and at least you can have a conversation. So instead of just having 2 big speakers, we have a lot of speakers there. So really, the whole summary here is we have a controlled system that's appropriate for the pavilion, for the people inside it, so they can hear whenever they're having a function in the pavilion. They'll be able to, I don't want to say perfectly because my hearing's not perfect, but they'll be able to hear the speaker, whoever, if they have any type of, let's say a video playing, I don't know how they're going to use it, but everybody's going to get the same experience at a level they'll be able to hear without it being overly loud inside the pavilion, and things will not bleed out past the pavilion. And that's the intent of the system. Does anybody have any questions?
No, thank you.
I do have a question. So, based on the size of the pavilion, is there any reason that the speaker, you know, the person speaking, could not be heard without amplification throughout the pavilion?
Not in this case. So the speaker themselves will likely be raising their voice or using a bullhorn to be heard. Throughout the pavilion, yes. Okay. So the design here, although it's, and I don't want to tell you that my profession is in architectural acoustical design. So I'm giving my feedback based upon just general experience. But this does not look like it's built to be like an amphitheater where your presentation, right, when you go to a city, to an opera house, and those walls and angles to reflect the sound so they don't need amplification. This here has various angles to it. It's limiting. It's not like that. So I don't believe it would have any chance to work that way.
Thank you.
Personally.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Good questions. Thank you.
I don't know if the board has any questions for us generally. If not, well, I know Jameson and maybe some of the neighbors want to say some things, so
Absolutely.
We'll
Yes.
listen.
So are there any people in the audience that would like to speak? Please raise your hand so we can get your, okay. Let's start here, and we'll work our way across the room. So if you would like to step up first and be sworn in, that would be great. Thank you.
State your name and address for the record.
Debbie Buell, 22 Borden Lane.
Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do. Good afternoon, and thank you for this opportunity. I'm not expert or practiced in this area of real estate or law, and I just want to say that to some extent, I think that this hearing helps the process work in the community. We have, as you know from our submissions, concerns about noise and light, in particular in terms of what have been previously really kind of undefined uses of the pavilion. And in the last 20 minutes, we've gotten, some information about that, and I appreciate it. And, I'm thinking and trying to understand it as it's been presented. It's detailed. I would like the opportunity to reflect on it outside, this 3 minutes that I've had. I'd like to consult with our acoustic expert who, unlike the gentleman who's just presented in a very complete way, which I appreciate, and I do hope that we get a copy of his presentation. I would like to review it with our acoustical expert who is not a purveyor of AV systems, but is an acoustical consultant, more broadly and theoretically, I guess, than somebody who sets up AV systems. But I want to say that I really appreciate hearing that the center started from the perspective of wanting to design a sound system that would take into account the fact that they are in a residential neighborhood. That means a lot. I'm not quite sure why we're just hearing about that now. I would have really appreciated having these kind of conversations after we filed our first set of objections in February, being kind of alarmed about the numbers. The information that we have seen to date before today about the sound system was one piece of paper and didn't have any specifications of the speakers whatsoever. So I just want to say I'd like to have our council speak to holding open the hearing, which I understand is, has its own set of rules. But I certainly want to say that I think this is great progress, and I want to get to a good place. I want to be friendly with my neighbors. That's part of what I enjoy about being out here in this beautiful place, and I'd like the opportunity to make some progress on this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, members of the board. My name is Jamison McWilliams from Crouch McWilliams Law Group at 10 Pantago in East Hampton Village. Yeah, oh, sorry. Jamison McWilliams from 10 Pantago in East Hampton Village. I am an attorney for Debbie Buell, who just spoke, and her husband, Charles Henry, who reside at 22 Buell Lane. They have been for 16 years. Borden Lane. She has that local last name. And Madeline Haberman and Michael Sprung, who live at 24 Borden Lane for 15 years. I was only recently retained. I tried to, catch up quickly with the materials that were presented and that were available in the record. So, like my client, though, there's been, a number of additional materials and things presented today that we're trying to kind of absorb and synthesize and speak to quickly on the spot. So I'm not really prepared to do that, but the kind of overarching sentiment that my clients wanted me to convey here is that, and I'm glad that she spoke also and said this directly, is that they have maintained, what I think is a great neighborly relationship for, over a decade, right, close to 2 decades. They do not outright oppose the project. Up until this morning and this afternoon, the concerns were really just the holes in the materials that seemingly were exactly where their questions were coming from, and that's what was missing in the record. The lights were somewhat demonstrated in the materials. However, it did seem like there were some things held up today that are not in the record and maybe were different than what was originally presented, those fixtures and the numbers. And then certainly the sound is their primary concern. One thing that they had said to me that I wanted to mention was that it does sound like they do hear conversations, they do hear outdoor activities now. It's not something that bothers them, but it is something that they hear, and there is no outdoor amplification now. So sort of common sense says there may still just be some questions and things that need to be understood and explored a little bit more. So really, what I had prepared was that there were still a lot of outstanding questions. I think now there is a lot more material that needs to be understood. So we do ask, and it does seem appropriate in my opinion, that the record is left open for two reasons. I think that even the landscape plan, which was raised, I don't think that reflects accurately what is being proposed. That's going to be a document that's going to have to be added later, unless they have it today. Once you close the hearing, as you guys know, it's closed. Also, all of those slides and those documents need to be reviewed by the board, and I would think it would be easier to have it physically in the record than just, the verbal explanation of them. And then, that would make us the most comfortable, and then I could kind of put more precise thoughts down, maybe in a letter to the board. If it doesn't seem like that's going to happen, if the record's going to be closed, then we kind of have more of a specific ask, which would be, there was more information today about the primary use and some secondary uses and, sort of anecdotal comments like there won't be things like boozy celebrations and weddings and things like that. Also, the speakers, and this sounds like a very specific product that could be very helpful. I don't know how the board could be comfortable looking at some of the special permit standards without having to condition the approval on specific things like that. So that would be sort of our ask. If we don't have time to, thoughtfully respond to what was submitted, then it's sort of the overarching ask would be that the board condition the approval on only those types of speakers and technology being used, and or maybe a decibel level at a certain distance and certain events. And I don't feel comfortable, and I don't think they do either, not being members of that congregation and participating in those types of events. I don't want to be the person to say this event and not this event, but
I believe we're going to keep this open, just so you're aware, because there is a lot of information. I think we do need to obtain some of this stuff that was prepared and presented today, as well as I mentioned before, the landscape drawing, a revised one for the record. So we will need some more information for the record before we can even render a decision or close the hearing.
Right. Okay. So then I'll stop rambling on these ideas that came up today. Thank you guys for your time.
Thank you. I think there would. Oh.
Good afternoon.
How are you?
My name's Robert Petrozo.
If you can be sworn in by Pam.
Hi, Robert Petrozo, 20 Woods Lane, East Hampton, New York.
You swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Thanks. Hi. My wife and I live at 20 Woods Lane. We've been living there we've been in East Hampton since 1992. We've been living at 20 Woods. We've been living at 20 Woods Lane next to the Jewish Center for more than 20 years. We've been good neighbors. The gentleman, I think his name was Alex, that opened up the meeting had said that there were no neighbors, the adjacent neighbors, that have written letters of opposition. My wife and I did write a letter of opposition on March 7th. We are an adjacent neighbor. We live, 2 doors east of the Jewish Center. And one of the concerns that I have, and I'm not a acoustic expert, but common sense says that there's no speakers now. There's going to be speakers. I would believe it's going to be louder than it was without speakers. Excuse me. My main concern, which hasn't been addressed, and something that we've been living with since I've moved in, is the safety issue of cars parked all over Woods Lane, actually on both sides of the street. At times there could be more than 50 cars parked on that street, and people leaving at the same time after the event, backing out. There's been multiple times where our driveway, our own private driveway, has been blocked. My children couldn't get out safely, couldn't ride bikes there. That hasn't been addressed, and it seems as though if there's going to be more events with this outdoor pavilion, where are all those cars going to be? Where are they going to park safely? Because currently, right now, the way it is, it's not safe. So I have a number of concerns, but the one of safety is of utmost importance to me. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I believe there were two hands that came up over on this side.
Hi, how are you? Dr. Alan Tofey, 20 Borden Lane.
Swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
So, board members, first of all, thank you for your time. I appreciate the opportunity to be heard. I'll just start and make this really brief because I know a lot's been said about this. My fiance and I moved into 20 Borden Lane in 2021. When we did so, we understood it to be a residential space. We knew that there was a house of worship directly south of us, but there was no amplified sound at that time. And since moving in, we've really gotten to know some of our neighbors, Debbie and Madeline, and we look forward to meeting the Rabbi Josh. Seems like a great guy. Look forward to getting to know him. But currently, I would state that I do hear sound from the outdoor activities when I'm in my yard. I don't expect that to get quieter with speakers. So just echoing everyone else's comments, no pun intended, I expect speakers that are amplified to be louder. And there are lights that certainly do come into our house and our yard. And to add 44 more lights, I think would be something I want more information on. So I'm glad that that's going to be made part of the record so we could review it. And I think those are really the comments I wanted to make, so I appreciate your time.
Thank you very much.
Kristen Frank, I'm at 26 Woods Lane.
Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do. Hello, everyone. I appreciate the time and the opportunity. We've been at 26 Woods Lane for about a year and a half, and we are, if the Jewish Center is here, there's their secondary building here, and I'm right behind it. So Borden Lane is here. I would just be an extension of Borden Lane, and I'm right behind their second facility, which is where they have a lot of, well, I'm assuming that there are a lot of children's programs and things like that. So a couple of things that I just want to point out that others have already pointed out, but one of the bigger things for me is the parking overflow situation. And because we share a lane, in order for me to get back to my flag lot, that particular driveway is, whenever there are services, is filled. And many times I'm not able to get out of my driveway. They're usually very accommodating to try to move things around, but that's still a little bit difficult. And I'm supportive of it because, you know, it doesn't happen that frequently. And so, and I respect the community, I respect the synagogue, and I want the community to be able to thrive. So I guess what concerns me is really about the frequency of type of events that a new pavilion would allow for, and I think there will probably be significantly more if there are 7 events now that they're saying, whether they're bar mitzvahs, bat mitzvahs, and weddings. I would suspect that adding a pavilion would want to encourage for the community more. So I think we also would need a way to manage both the safety, which I think you spoke to, but also just the ability to get out of my driveway. And I think it's not a great experience, but I'm supportive. I don't want it to be excessive, and I believe it could become excessive because there's a nicer facility, and it would allow for that and encourage that. From a noise perspective, you know, every time there is an event, there's noise. There's the kids are outside, they're playing. Again, that doesn't bother me as long as it's limited. If this becomes much broader, that becomes a real difficulty and problem in terms of the neighborhood atmosphere and your quality of life and your experience. And I think, you know, I guess, one thing when we're talking about the sound, I know that the village has decided not to allow pickleball. And, to me, this is going to be much louder than pickleball would be. And so it's a little concerning and surprising to me that we're actually having this conversation. This is a neighborhood. And we all want to be good neighbors, but we also want to experience, the beauty of life here in East Hampton, which we're here for a reason. To me, this affects, honestly, the entire village of East Hampton, because to me, this feels like a fundamental change of zoning in the neighborhood that ultimately will diminish the residential property value. It will significantly increase the excessive traffic and congestion and safety in that area and coming into the village, because it's just, as he said, there's already 50 cars lined up, when they're servicing, there's nowhere for them to go. And so they just keep coming in and filling up more. So, that needs to be addressed and figured out. And I think there's also the increase of sound that will ultimately decrease the quality of life. And that sounds, this sounds, very negative, because I really do support the Jewish community. I just also want to have the respect of the neighborhood taken into account here, because this is fundamentally different from, I think, what a neighborhood, the expectation when we all bought here, what we would expect the neighborhood to be, and not an event space. So thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you. Is there anyone else that wants to speak?
One more.
Please.
Hi. Right, and state your name and address for the record.
Michael Sprung, 24 Borden Lane in East Hampton.
Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Thank you.
I have something different to say after all the presentations. I mostly support what my neighbors have said, in not so much opposition to the pavilion, but to hold off and keep the racket open so we could truly assess all that we've heard today. One issue that I haven't heard addressed is when the rabbi and others from the temple mentioned services being held in the back, was not so much the mention of music during the services. At the temple we belong to, almost all the services have music as part of the service. And so I think that's going to bring a whole different level of noise and sound to the service and to the neighborhood. So with the conditions that hopefully would be included if there ever was an approval by the board of the pavilion, that conditions such as how often it's going to be used, how many people, whether there's going to be music, is it going to be a number of musicians playing, or some sort of conditions which could help us neighbors be good neighbors and want them to fulfill their desire to pray, and so we could all get along. Okay?
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Alex, do you want to?
I'll also invite anyone from the Jewish Center. Probably had some things that sparked a comment in their head as well. But in no particular order, I just do want to say a couple of things. Obviously, we pulled the wrong board today. This project's been going on for a while from us. We presented the design review board already. We bought the wrong board, but what's submitted to the village is accurate. The updated landscaping plans are there. We haven't done any last minute drops. There's nothing that the village hasn't seen at this point. Obviously, Mike's sound presentation was technical and in-depth. I think it reads better hearing it live than reading it. I don't want to go tit for tat, but it is accurate to say that the properties adjoining the property adjoining the Jewish Center where this pavilion is. Again, there is the other Jewish Center property between us and the Petruzzo. Sorry if I think at 20 Woods, and the parking. To the extent there's a parking issue there, again, it doesn't change, nothing about this project changes that. This is not more rear ends in seats, because of this thing. This is the same congregation. I do want to point out too that there is the Chabad house across the street, not affiliated with the Jewish Center of the Hamptons. I don't know this for the fact, but obviously I spoke to the rabbi, I spoke to the cantor, particularly about the Petruzzo's, letter saying, hey, our driveway's been blocked. Neither the rabbi nor the cantor said, look, we've never had any contact from them about that issue. As far as we know, I mean, maybe some of the High Holy Day services notwithstanding, we don't otherwise know about, we don't believe that our traffic generated by the Jewish Center goes down to their property. Again, I'm not saying that's fact. That's our belief and where we stood on the issue. So I guess what I'm saying is there is a possibility that some of the traffic that's in front of the Petrozzo's house could maybe be generated by the Chabad house. I don't know that. I'm just speculating, but we did go into this not thinking it was a result of any Jewish Center parking issues. In terms of where we stand in terms of opening and closing the hearing, look, obviously, it should come as no surprise. We'd prefer to close the hearing, move on. We think we've addressed all the concerns, shown that this project is a benign use. But I do want to point out the specifics of the special permit standards. It honestly doesn't read to me to be as heavy of a lift or as high of a bar as some of the other approvals like a variance. I mean, we're looking at the orderly and reasonable use of the adjacent properties. Again, between the letters of support and the fact that the Jewish Center owns 2 of the 4 adjacent properties, we have addressed that. Are we preventing the orderly and reasonable use of other uses permitted? I'm paraphrasing a little bit because if I read it out loud, it'd go too far down a rabbit hole. But prevent the orderly and reasonable use of other permitted uses in the area. No, we're not. You still orderly and reasonably use other houses in the area for residences. And we, for the village as a whole, are we adversely affecting the safety, health, welfare, comfort, convenience, and order of the village? And will the project be in harmony with the general purposes of this code? And I think pretty clearly we've met those 3 standards. So, with all that said, I'm sure everyone gets up here and says this, but we want to be good neighbors. There are safeguards in check against, uses of the property with or without this pavilion that could be offensive, such as the special event permits, the noise ordinance, and of course, Harry, our president, asked me to reiterate. Look, we are always a phone call away. We're happy to provide appropriate numbers to call in the event that this or any other thing creates a nuisance, just as we would if the roles were reversed. And I mean, it is possible, and frankly, it does happen that the neighbors have parties or loud events, and so it works. To everyone's point, it works both ways in the residential neighborhood.
Great, thank you. One thing that I would like to see, and maybe the board can weigh in as well, I think it would be very important that any of the material that was presented today could be filed with the village as part of the record, because I know some of these things we don't have in our packet. The other thing I would like to see is maybe I know we have a plan showing light fixture locations. Can we get a plan of how the light spillage goes from the pergola or pavilion, similar to what we see when we ask for an ATM or something like that, where they have an enormous amount of light just for security and state reasons, but I want to make sure that this isn't spilling over onto property lines and stuff like that. The other thing is there something that we can get for that regarding sound as well? I've seen plans that show the decibel levels as they go out, how they dissipate, just so we have something for the record in the village once we're all done.
I know you said that we have the revised landscape plan, so that one's kind of checked off my list. I don't know if anybody else has anything else that they want to add or ask for.
I don't, but I have some questions. Go ahead, Abigail.
I just had one question, and I don't mean to call anyone back up, but I was just for LaGuardia. I had a landscaping question. Just does sound buffering vegetation exist, and is it something that you've considered planting around the boundary? And the same sort of question applying to the light. What's the height of the light? And on the boundary line, what's going to be the height of the arborvitaes? I know you said 10 feet. I think they grow very fast.
What's the height of the arborvitae in the back?
Yeah, so the proposed height that they're going to go in is 10 feet, and that is...
Sorry, I have to swear you in again.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Please state your name and address.
Alex Blutorin, LaGuardia Design, 38 Scuttle Hole Road, Watermill.
Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
So the arborvitae that's going in along the back property line was partly chosen for its density and the ability to help block sound as well. So we do use that quite frequently in residential applications where there's a noisy street.
Okay.
It's one of the best trees, truthfully, for blocking sound.
Okay.
So they'll go in at 10 feet. They grow very fast, probably about 2 feet a year. That's a part shade scenario, so I'd say probably a foot a year. And the idea is to let them go, pretty tall so that they can really help buffer the neighbors next door.
And they'll be planted closely together, or
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah, it'll become a hedge.
Okay.
So it'll be a hedge right away, right from day one. But the idea is to let them grow taller. Yes.
And how tall are the light? You mentioned there was lighting mounted on the trees.
There's existing lighting on the trees. Yeah, we would be putting new lights in to replace those and no higher than 14 feet.
Okay.
Facing down.
Facing down, yeah. All dark sky compliant fixtures, facing down.
And sorry, one more question. The buffering planting, that's only on the, what is this, the name, the Borden side lane?
North.
Not the side, the
west side?
east and west side.
Yeah, it's only along the north side currently where there's a privet hedge that's, you could barely call it a hedge.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
I had some special permit questions, so I don't know whether it's Tom or Lisa. So irrespective of this pavilion, say the Jewish Center, somebody wants to have a wedding there, they apply for a special permit. They can put up a tent, et cetera. How does that work? I'm just trying to get a feel for this.
Well, each special permit, when applied for, is looked at individually, and, the requirements do have to be met. It goes through the different department heads, and we each have comments, and then ultimately the administrator signs off. So
that would be
it's each individual event, depending on if there's music or.
And that would be the same if I wanted to do it in my backyard at my house?
It'd be the same thing.
Okay. That was my question.
Excellent.
And then,
I am Robert Petrozzo, 20 Woods Lane, East Hampton, New York.
Swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I do, yes. I just wanted to address, and I don't want to go tit for tat either, but I know for a fact that the cars that are parked that block my driveway are from the Jewish Center because it's been happening before the Shabbat even came to be, number one. Number two, my wife and I, when we first got our house and moved into the village next to the Jewish Center, were overwhelmed when we first came out and saw all of these cars, and we did speak to the rabbi and the cantor multiple times, and this was many years ago. I don't know that it's the rabbi that's here today. I doubt it. And they said, we will talk to our congregation and we will address this and this won't happen again. And it has happened multiple times since then. So we just threw our hands up.
Great, thank you. Anybody else on the board would like to say anything?
I got some more questions. Sorry, Jimmy.
No, go right ahead.
Rabbi Franklin, I have some questions of you.
State your name and address for the record.
Josh Franklin, 50 Woods Lane, East Hampton.
Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
So I've noticed over the years on the High Holy Days, there's often a tent in kind of the front yard. And that continue on the busier days, correct? Or would that be moved to this?
We don't currently have a definitive option for how the pavilion will impact our high holiday usage of a tent, but it will likely be in tandem with something that because it's not going to be large enough alone in order to be able to support our high holiday attendance.
Okay.
So there would likely need to be some supplementary structure in addition to the pavilion for the high holidays.
And on the high holidays, how many congregants usually show up? Approximately.
So pre-COVID.
Pre-COVID. Yeah, let's go pre-COVID.
Since COVID, we have instituted live streaming, and we've had a very large number of congregants start to stream services instead of attending in person. But our largest numbers in 2019 were about 1,000 individuals who would attend high holiday services. That number is probably reduced by about 20 to 30%, given the accessibility of streaming.
Okay, and regular weekly services, about how many people?
At a regular weekly Shabbat service in the morning, on Saturday morning, we would have anywhere between 20 and 50 people. On a Friday evening in the off-season, because from Memorial Day to Labor Day, we are at Main Beach. In the off-season, we would only expect about 10 to 25 people on a typical Friday night.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? No? So I would say that let's keep this open until next month. If we can get those requested items, that would be great. And that would give everyone in the community a chance to look at the file as well, to review the information that was presented today. So we'll hold this off until next month. You don't need a motion for that, Pam, right?
No, I don't think so.
No? Okay. So that concludes this one. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion.
Second. Second. All in favor? All right. Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you for those questions. That's good.
Phil, I hope you're going to get